Synopsis. Being transmigrated was not something Liam thought of as possible, it was fictional, and sadly for him, it became real. Here he was on a beach with an all-familiar implant glowing in his arm. Above him in the sky, a gas giant called Polyphemus and its many moons, of which he was on one, Pandora. This an Avatar, Jame Cameron, an ARK Survival Evolved fanfic happening in the universe of the former but with the potential of more. I don't own anything, everything goes to its respective owner. 1. Welcome to Pandora. Your baby Argiganotosaurus, LVL 253, Argiganotosaurus, was killed by Liam, LVL 190. Again. It's the freaking 5th of the night. Yeah, I didn't get the health status of the mother and the color I wanted, Liam answered nonchalantly through the mic, not fazed by the body of the baby glitching in and out of existence he was mining the prime meats of. Muting himself he yawned, rubbing his eyes as he looked at the hour, 0:09 a.m., he was surprised by how fast time flew by. Tomorrow, or more like in a few hours, he had to go to work as a sous chef in a restaurant, and if he arrived late he would get emotionally and mentally demolished by his superior. Pity, mercy, and anything remotely related to empathy was foreign concept when you enter the cuisine. Gonna stop for tonight. Good night guys, he unmuted himself and said, this was answered by 3 good nights and, alright you have work tomorrow, RIP Bozo, which was answered by a fuck you to that person, and then he disconnected from the server, and Discord. Stretching himself he stood up and walked up to his bed before plopping himself onto it. And so it was the last time on the earth of this universe that the 24-years-old man that was Liam Cram will be. His body, void of any life, will be found 2 days later by his mother who was supposed to bring him to his aunt's birthday, his death forever inexplicable. It was as if his life was switched off. On a beach in another universe, on the moon of a giant gaseous planet light years away from the earth of this universe. What looked like a well-built human male could be seen breathing slowly in the atmosphere of Pandora, only having some minor difficulty doing so. He was shaved off of all bodily hair and only wore a white boxer drawing a thin line between nudity and exhibitionism. URG, Liam groaned, his body hurting all over like a bitch. Turning around he was met with the sun assaulting his eyes. His mind was still not there but rapidly catching up to the oddness of the situation. Bringing his left hand in front of his face he blocked the harsh sunray. His eyes turned to pinpricks as an all-familiar prism entered his vision. It was of an icy metallic gray with an orange hologram floating millimeters above it. Hee. This dream is strange, he instantly denied the possibility of it being real. He was having a very realistic dream while he was sleeping in his room and he would wake up. To prove his point he scratched the implant, the feeling of his finger against the metal and nail against his skin. He froze, it was too real. No. This doesn't make sense. This is a dream, this must be one. It must, he denied, but denying as much as he wanted didn't change anything but increased the weight of his current reality in his mind. The wind against his bare head and chest, the soft sand on his ass that was infiltrating everywhere, the distinctive smell of the sea. And the many moons with a fucking gas giant for all to see in the sky. He sat on his knee with his eyes closed trying to find anything to hold and prove it wasn't real. Panic was setting in, his breathing increased, and the only thing on his mind was, why the fuck was he on a beach with a survivor implant embedded in his left wrist? As time flew by he got his breathing in check, panic won't help. On the contrary, however, saying it was easier than doing but his mind felt clearer. He felt a strong sensation of déjà vu, and he wasn't dense enough to not realize the possible implication. He stood up with difficulty, he was taller and more muscular. Before he had a thin frame and was 1.79 meters, 5 feet 9, tall and now 1.95 meters, 6 feet 4, tall with the body of a bodybuilder. Quite an imposing figure for a human. The difference was drastic and disorienting, the weaker gravity of Pandora only added salt to the injury. But he rapidly got the hang of it. With hesitation and no small amount of dread, he walked up to the clear water of the sea, the cool water washing over his bare feet. What he was met with wasn't his face, it was the face of a man in his late 20s early 30s, he closed his eyes and sighed. His skin was now tanned, his eyes now a soft gray with a hint of azure, almost ethereal. The overall shape of his face, nose, jaws, and ears. Nothing remained of what he once was but his mind, and that also felt different. Luckily he wasn't using a PvP character, or did he like making abominations as funny and ridiculous as they look. The server was vanilla in almost everything, stats being in that, and there were multiple quality of life mods on the server, one that gave more options to customize the survivor. To make them less ugly. Fuck, even my voice is not my own. This is insane, Liam uttered, his mind ablaze with too many questions, mostly about the identity crisis and more questions that only made even more questions that will likely never be answered. He was his level 190 character, and it was more than appearance-wise. He felt stronger than he ever was. He felt like he could punch through a tree, break human bones like they were matchstick, and more. And there was new information, new knowledge, new data, about the various engrams the character had that were swimming in his mind. From how to make a simple stone axe to a futuristic force field capable of tanking the strongest nuke of humanity point blank. And it was only the tip of the iceberg, it was more than just the engrams in the games. So much more, he marveled at it, the ingenuity, complexity of it, and yet. He wasn't in his own body, he wasn't where he should be. It felt alien, wrong but also right in a strange way he couldn't explain. It was as if it always had been this way, but he knew it wasn't. It was both terrifying and soothing. I'm my fucking ARK survivor, Liam said, his voice quivering, yet he was calm as one can be in this unique situation. He was in control of himself and his emotions. He knew he shouldn't be this calm, but he was, and was somewhat grateful for that, but he was far from fine. This situation was insane, it utterly violated all of what he believed possible. Okay. Well, go step by step. First, let's see how much I can use my implant, Liam thought, immediately deciding to set himself objectives, and the first was to learn more about the implant and what he can do with it. This little tech device, which was functioning with the small amount of element it passively produces with the help of the body, was for all intent and purpose his lifeline, both metaphorically and literally. It was fused with the bone of his left forearm, intricately connected to his nervous system. It was more than just an implant. It was an integral part of his body. It stored the memory matrix, his memory matrix. It was his consciousness, memories, and personality combined, as close as soul as it could get. And it also stored all of his biometrics, constantly, such as muscle memories. The thing that interested him was to see if it worked like in the video game. He crouched down and picked a stone with his left hand. Now was the tricky part, he didn't know what to exactly do. Focusing on the implant, he sensed a sort of very deep pocket, a personal pocket space. Immediately he stared with bated breath as the stone and its close surroundings seemed to get spaghettified before the stone disappeared from the face of Pandora. He could still feel the weight of the stone. It was minimal and evenly distributed all over his body. If he didn't focus on it, he wouldn't have sensed the difference. Picking another petal, this one decently sized, he repeated the same and had the same result. This is amazing, Liam said with awe. A small hopeful smile found its way on his face. The use of the inventory felt familiar. He was sure that he got more from his in-game character than his body. And the implant scanned them, giving him rough information on what the stones were composed of. They were composed of mostly high-carbon iron, with a sliver of tin and a teeny tiny bit of gold. Then he willed one of the stones out. The process took a good 2 seconds, then he stored it again, and he repeated the process a dozen times. The inventory is here. Now next on the list, he focused on the implant and a bright light emanated from it. It was a hologram only decipherable by him. The first thing he noticed was the dozen red messages popping up, one that said he was disconnected from the ARK orbital network, the colony ship, and all he should be currently connected to. This confirmed one thing, he wasn't in the universe of ARK Survival Evolved. This severely limited the implant's normal function, such as the ability to tell the time, weather, humidity, and temperatures, and let the survivor respawn with her memories if she were to have an early death, but it also meant that any rules were now void. The second thing is the interface was fundamentally different, with less video game-ish, and a clear lack of stats/attributes with exception of the weight limit standing at 700 kilograms, 543 pounds, which is equal to approximately 3 big adult female brown bears and a half, more or less. The other stats were here, just not shown, and in plain effect as an integral part of his body. All were based on the physical aspect, and this resulted in him for one feeling this strong, and not being already dead of gas poisoning. This didn't mean he was imperceptible to the atmosphere of Pandora. He had an honorable and weak tingling sensation in his lungs. The in-game character was far from being restricted by human limits, however it was far from magical here. It came with a cost, resources. It is impossible to light an entire house with the same amount of energy necessary to light a single light bulb. Third, there was no crafting, it was grayed out. Unusable, he will have to do everything with his own 2 hands. This was a major weakness, as this function let him jump through a multitude of steps, but at least he had the theoretical knowledge in the deepest of detail. It was a strange sensation. To have such a wealth of knowledge, so much information from the most primitive and ancient human first tools to futuristic technological marvels only thought in fiction that would take several lifetimes of even the most brilliant mind to learn. Here all at his disposal, but ironically, most of this knowledge about future technology was unusable. And, fourth, all other aspects besides the ones said and the ones containing the adventurer notes were grayed out. This is sorted out. Now only need to map the area to know where the fuck am I, find a stable food source, drinkable water, make shelter, tools. Liam said, each new task adding a mental weight. It will be hard. He then gazed upon the fantastical dreamy sky of Pandora, of enchanting blue with soft white clouds, all of it beautified by the ethereal shape of the gas giant in the far distance. It was one of the most beautiful sights he ever saw, but he couldn't truly appreciate it. And somehow find a way home. He had a family, friends, and a simple and pleasant life he was forcefully taken from. He didn't want to be here, even with this superhuman body in a vast array of knowledge. How he dearly wished it was but a dream, but he knew better, and this objective of finding his way back. An objective that he will with certainty not achieve, that much he was aware of, but that's still something to thrive for, an end goal. Anyway, that's good and all, but he needs to survive, no, thrive to the highest extent before even thinking of that. 2. Pandorian Tickle Chicken. The waves of the sea washed over a beautiful but seemingly desert beach while a practically naked human could be seen running around, exploring his surroundings. All was alien, and not in a good way. Being beautiful doesn't make things comforting. Liam took whatever he could find, which was seashells and stones, which was all there was. Certainly the presence of seashells indicated life, and as such potential food, but the problem was he knew nothing about what was in the sea. The lack of cover was also a problem, as the lack of resources, and not forgetting also the lack of drinkable water. He wasn't going to try seawater. That's just suicidal. Adding to that, the sea level was higher than before, indicating a rising tide. He will need to move, the only way being walking up the giant hills of sand behind him. In this kind of situation, anything he could do came with great risk. The only good choice was the one with the most optimal balance between risk and reward. And moving away from an unknown sea filled with unknown creatures and the currents was the best choice. Liam walked up the hills, stumbling more than once, but he arrived at the top and was met with an otherworldly sight. At the top of this hill from all directions a strange dead plant shaped like the horn of a goat grew out of the sand by millions, all glistening in the sunlight, all growing not past his ankle in height. Their complex and deep roots network was the only thing maintaining the billions of tons of sand in place. He stopped mid-step, halting himself from stomping on one of those strange plants. They were covered in small, sharp thorns made of salt crystals, and the reason why the area was sparkling. This instantly sparked his interest and he plucked one, from the base, avoiding the thorn before putting it in his inventory. Plenty of salt in those herbs, like a good third of the plant. Is that useful? Very useful, Liam remarked. Salt was useful not only as a condiment but also to preserve food. It can even be used to disinfect wounds, and it was only a small part of its use. If he could efficiently extract the salt from them, that is, but he already had ideas for that. He dubbed those plants goat horns, for their shape and the fact that goats loved salt. Then a realization hit him. He will need to walk past them to arrive more inland. Fuck, he swore, walking barefoot on them for at least 200 meters, 218 yards, was not going to cut it, salt plus sand on wounds, and risk of infection. That was a big no. His first obstacle on Pandora, traversing the plain of goat horns, which was more of an annoyance for him. A good 30 minutes later Liam could be seen on the other side, a trail left behind of him plucking his way through. In his inventory was 154 kilograms, 340 pounds, of it. The more he collected the faster his movement and precision got. The weight of objects in his inventory affected his weight outside, but only by half of theirs. And the weight was more spread on his trunk, such as the chest. It was something to take into account. But it was a pretty unique feeling to know you are currently capable of carrying something this heavy with such ease. The fact he was this strong didn't quite register just yet. Scabs already falling off, Liam noticed with pleasant surprise that the superficial cuts he got from the razor-sharp salt crystal on his hands were healing at an increased rate. That by the way hurt way too much for the size of the wounds, similar to paper cuts but worse. Literally adding salt to the injury. Looking behind him his eyes widened as he saw the straight line he left behind, it made into perspective what he just did. Then he saw the plant already growing back, it was a surreal sight, he wasn't going to go to this beach anytime soon. He breathed in and out, the base of his feet planted on a mix of sand and dirt. He advanced more inland, the harsh terrain of the seashore letting place to a lowland savanna hybrid mix composed of plains with flora progressively taking in size, color, and variety. Liam walked along the tall grass, noticing a lack of animals but putting on it is normal. What does he know of the fauna here? He didn't stop himself from picking up dead wood, and plants of all kinds, most being blades of grass, some even were similar to bamboo, making them extremely useful. The grass in most areas was taller than him, greatly reducing his line of sight. He stopped in front of a plant with a familiar shape but it didn't look out of place in the middle of the alien flora. It looked like an aloe vera, so he took a leaf from the stem of the plant. He scanned it with his inventory and he got that there was a surprising amount of water inside. If it was safe for human consumption or not, he didn't know. The implant didn't have the precision, not the computing power to tell him if the complex and unknown compounds found in an alien plant are hazardous to humans or not. That didn't stop him from taking a good portion of the leaves from the plant, it was the only source of water he found and could use. He continued to walk, staying at a safe distance from the taller bush and tall grass, careful of where he stepped. But apparently, that wasn't enough. Squawk. Liam froze at this sound, hesitantly turning around. He was met face to face with an odd-looking bird standing out of a large bush a dozen of meters away from his location. The bird was 5 meters, 16 feet 4, tall and possessed 2 pairs of horizontally slitted eyes that were gazing at him with clear aggressiveness. He didn't know what he specifically did to piss it off but it sure was looking mighty pissed. It was featherless, its skin was gray and blue, its beak was similar to that of a duck or a swan, indicating it probably was herbivorous. Its head attached at the top of a long and flexible neck had an orange crest. It possessed a pair of flamboyant membranous wings on its back too small for flight, it was menacingly flaring them out. The thing that was taking all of his attention was the claws had the end on its third pair of limbs, its arms. Each of the hands possessed 3 black claws, the one on the middle digit being bigger than himself. The bird was clacking them together and the sound was that of 2 pieces of metal hitting each other. Liam faced the unholy spawn of a therizinosaur, a cassowary, a swan, and a bat, his eyes dilated to their utmost limit while his heart started hammering in his chest, pumping blood and adrenaline throughout his body. He put his hand in the air and slowly walked backward, while always keeping eye contact with the alien beast. The great ostropede glared with its 2 pairs of eyes at the strange hairless small bipedal creature that dared to walk into its territory. These animals were territorial and rather aggressive, the fact that it was a young male in the middle of the mating season, and that the small bipedal creature in front of it felt not wrong per se, but out of place, out of sync, completely disconnected from the great and all-encompassing mother, and this only amplified the raging instinct that commanded it to kill this pesky intruder. And the strange glowing prism was weird and shiny, it would be good to attract a mate. Shit, Liam internally swore. He could instinctively feel it, the palpable tension in the air, what it was going to do next. what it wanted. He was in extreme danger, he needed to run away, and find a place safe from this titanic bird, and fast. His gray eyes rapidly scanned his surroundings, but he never let go of eye contact for more than a second. In the distance amid the small to medium-sized trees was one tree that seemed tall and strong enough for him to climb up and that the bird couldn't simply unroot. However, it was quite far. A stone materialized above the palm of his left hand. He prepared himself to run, hoping that he would outrun the beast. Hurling the stone, the alien bird focused on it for half a second, a time Liam used to sprint as if his life depended on it. Which it did. Right after he passed next to the confused bird, he heard it squawk, a squawk that promised blood. This spurred him to run even faster, pushing even more strength he didn't know he had into each of his steps. He rapidly arrived at the human-known limit speed, and right after he broke through it, only the dense atmosphere of Pandora limited his speed to around 45 kilometers per hour, 29 miles per hour, and his lungs could not function at their full capacity. Running at such speed would have felt incredible if the claws that barely missed to cleave his head off didn't exist. Liam heard the snap of a beak behind him, and felt the wind produced by the swing of the massive claws along his back. He could die, and he would if he didn't do something. He had never felt this close to death. It was visceral, both terrifying and oddly exhilarating. At the same time there was this feeling from a part deep within him that told him it wasn't the first time a situation like this happened. He took a sudden turn, surprising the great ostripede. This made the distance between the two greater. Alas, it was but a temporary solution, as it soon was back behind him. And so the chase continued for only Iwa or any other deity knew how long. Liam never looking back, his mind hyper-focused, zigzagging, weaving between the tall grass, moving around bushes. He was starting to feel the ache and burn in his muscles. Hope was in sight as he rapidly approached the tree. Its trunk rivaled giant redwood. It was tall as a 6-story building, its branches covered in small green oval-shaped leaves with bell-shaped red flowers growing all around its light beige and smooth bark. I need to slow down, Liam thought. A very risky and rushed plan was forming in his mind. Running at such speed while not being particularly lightweight made he couldn't simply stop, not like it would have changed if he was lighter. He needed to decelerate or he would smash into the tree. And that's what he did. His heart somehow beat faster as he felt each of the steps of the great ostripede. Right at the moment he arrived at the tree he stopped moving and at the last second crouched down. His eyes wide open, shivers running down his spine. Above him was the long middle claw of the bird half embedded into the trunk. It could have been him. It worked, Liam thought, but didn't let himself be distracted. He wasted no time and got hold of a branch and pulled himself up, passing in the middle of the claw that was above him. The branch barely holding on to his weight, he took another on instincts, and the next second was him climbing as fast as he could, while from below a cry close to one of that of frustration could be heard, and its vibration resonated through the tree. Liam's movements were far from precise, or optimal. He was really starting to feel weary, his lung burned, but he continued, adrenaline coursing through his body. Then he felt something cold touch his upper back. Time slowed down in his mind. He let out a muffled scream of agony as the 2-meter-long claw cut diagonally all along his back from his left shoulder to his right lower back, missing his spine by a mere few centimeters. But Liam didn't stop climbing. He couldn't. Even with the white-hot pain vibrating in waves from his blood-covered back. He only clenched his jaws as hard as he could and focused on climbing. It was the only thing that mattered. He will survive. 3. Returning to Stone Age. On the thick branch of a tree sat a human. His face was tense, pale, and sweaty, and his eyes bloodshot, his breathing ragged, the start of a headache, and his hands clutched against the bark. He succeeded in climbing but was injured in the process. Fuck. Fuck. Fuck, was all that Liam could think. Looking down he was met with the great ostripede's head, its 4 eyes glaring at him, and one of its claws was tainted red with his blood. It was calmly sitting on the ground with its legs folded under itself. It was waiting for him to fall, for him to weaken enough through blood loss and finish what it started. It could wait as long as necessary. All this area was part of its territory. The realization that the bird will wait and will not give up on wanting to kill him lighted something in him, a deep-seated anger born from his current situation, and at the moment it was mainly aimed at the bird. He never felt such a powerful urge before. he was going to kill it. He promised himself that. But not now. It was not blind anger, he wasn't going to kill himself for that and neither risk greater injury. His implant glowed brighter in response to his emotion. He will recover, and be properly prepared, all of which will need to be done methodically. But he will for the moment injure it, at least try. The law of retribution. An eye for an eye. Amidst the agony caused by the open wound on his back, he stood up. Each of his movements was felt through his back, only amplifying the pain. A jagged stone appeared on his left hand just like before. Liam took in a throwing position, muscle fibers flexing, muscle memories of his body working in tandem with his mind. He concentrated, regulating his breathing. He then took a very deep breath and yelled at the top of his lungs. "Hey! You son of a bitch!" This instantly attracted the great ostropede, who stood up. It didn't understand what the creature's noises meant and it didn't care. It attacked with its beak, snapping it shut at barely 2 meters from Liam's feet. Not wasting this chance, he threw the stone with as much force he could muster, and the projectile flew through the air with great speed and force. Squaw. It hit its mark. It dug right into the upper right eye's cornea, and blood immediately spurted out of the ruptured eyeball. The great ostraped panicked. It felt such intense pain for the first time, it didn't understand what just happened. It squawked in pain and moved away, shaking its head and body to get rid of the stone, but it was in vain and only aggravated the damage on the now unusable eye. It stumbled before running away. It should have gone for the kill earlier. The human didn't even celebrate his temporary victory, too exhausted, both mentally and physically, to do so or even care. The spur of anger had drained him of his last bit of strength. He lay against the smooth trunk, his weight on the uninjured side of his back, staring up at the sky. He saw the beautiful sunset of Pandora. From this place he could see the sea in the far distance. He closed his eyes and fell into a deep dreamless sleep. The next day he woke up, not thanks to the melodious song of small hummingbird-like creatures flying around and gorging themselves on the delicious nectar contained deep within the flowers, but to the pain in his body. "This is real," Liam mumbled. This tiny bit of naive hope that it was but a nightmare was crushed. Looking up, he saw a different yet similar enchanting sky that when he first woke up. There were different moons at different places. It was a sky he would see each time he woke up, each time a reminder he wasn't on Earth. Moving, he hissed as pain permeated his entire being. It was less powerful than yesterday but just as intense. His back turned the most and his legs were also extremely sore. Just like the next day of an intense workout, a workout was taken to the extreme, to the point of potentially crippling oneself. He was not in the best of shape, but he is alive. He didn't die of hemorrhage, and he was far from having lost a dangerous amount of blood. How do I even take care of that? Will it just heal away like the cuts on my hand? He thought with clear worry written on his face. A part of him was furious, but he controlled it. Anger here will not help. His hands carefully explored his back. It was caked in dry blood, and his face twitched in discomfort each time his finger moved too close to the claw wound. At the edge's skin where the cut was sallower, the skin already showed signs of healing. However, it will take time. He may heal faster than the average common mortal man, but a wound of this size will take more than a few hours and a tap on the shoulder to fully heal. Not counting that the wound would need to heal on its own without the help of suturing, as he couldn't do it himself for obvious reasons, and other modern medical necessities that could prevent several complications. And that he wasn't a doctor, and was blind to the flora and fauna of this world. Most of the things he could think of could lead to different problems or be counterproductive. The knowledge in his possession was more on the engineering side of things. Multiple tools could help, such as the tech phase gun that could mend flesh, but it was not made with sticks and stones. It was even more frustrating to have the solution but not the means to make it happen. I can only wait and hope I live. Fuck. At least. Let's use this time productively, he said to himself, with conviction in his voice. He wasn't going to let himself die. He was hungry and incredibly thirsty. Both of these problems could be answered by the various plant life he collected, such as the alien aloe vera. There also were flowers he could grab on the tree. If certain flowers can be eaten on Earth, surely why not here? Even the tree's sap could also potentially be used as a stable food and water source. He needed to regain strength. On the palm of his left hand appeared the beefy leaf of the aloe vera he took. The exterior was of a faded turquoise with some spine on the side. Switching the leaf of hands, a black seashell appeared in its place. One part of it was serrated and sharp like the blade of a knife, while the other was where the body creature had made the shell used to be when it was alive, and now it served as a handle. He cut the stem of the leaf with practiced ease and technique. The flesh inside was transparent and of a beautiful shade of pink. He sniffed it. It smelled similar to basil oil. It was far from the most appetizing thing he saw, but far from less appetizing either. He wasn't a picky eater and wasn't going to be one here. Lacking utensils to eat properly and not wanting to bite the outer layer, he put pressure with his finger, and with his force like the tube of toothpaste the flesh was slowly squeezed out. Not waiting for it to fall, he ate the gelatinous pink flesh from the source. It was weird in the mouth but otherwise tasted slightly sweet with an undertone of sourness at the end. Then his stomach grumbled, and without realizing he already ate all of it and was cutting a second leaf open, which he then also ate in record times. 10 leaves later and he was only somewhat satiated, but he stopped. He needed to be mindful to not eat his entire stock too soon. The flesh/gel in the leaves had a pain-dampening effect, he noted, and hoped it didn't have any other less than pleasant effect. It lessened the pain in his muscles, but the pain in his back was still present, and happy to prove its presence by the random wave of burning pains that made him want to scream high and loud. He didn't even know how he could think straight with that kind of pain. He was your run-of-the-mill civilian, but here he was. A different person, or a different aspect of his personality came up, or both. In all cases he was changed, forever. It was. He didn't know how to feel about that. It was both good and bad. The next few hours flew by, the shade of the tree protecting him from the harsh ray of the sun. It was a good spot, not too cold nor too hot, not too much wind, and high enough to protect him against most potential threats. Liam couldn't move much. If he did, he risked reopening the wound on his back, or even worse, falling, which would at best worsen his injury or at worst kill him. So he passed the time by crafting items that will help him. He made several wooden objects, notably a spoon and many spears, learning about what wood seemed better or worse for this or that purpose. It wasn't his first time carving wood, it was one of his hobbies, and it was relaxing. Distracting. Even if anybody could make pointy sticks, but he made better pointy sticks. Then he also weaved various plants. At first, he simply tested which one was better for what, which was good for paper, string, ropey, etc. Once that was done, he made what appeared to be a cover, and the start of clothing, notably a band that protected his back. He never did this before, but it felt as if, for comparison, someone was relearning to ride a bike. Liam knew of dozens of ways to weave plants into various things, from clothing to furniture, and what were each technique's weaknesses and advantages, all of this thanks to the engrams engraved in his very being. Since he was going to live on the tree for some time, he was going to make it as comfortable and safe as possible. So sleeping at the mercy of the elements and alien wildlife was a big no. Liam was like a child, at least in terms of understanding this world, and he was aware of it. He needed to learn. He would evidently make mistakes, which he already did earn a nasty wound. He would stumble, he would need to take risks, make difficult choices, and be resourceful and quick-witted, or he would be swallowed whole by this strange environment that inhabited Pandora. And so the day continued on. He also started to make a ceiling by using the branch above him. He then ate some more alien aloe vera to reduce the pain in his back, before falling asleep under the mesmerizing sunset of Pandora. A proto-blanket protecting his body was made of wide leaves tied together with strings of grass weaved together. This might have been harder than the first. He barely slept. Between the strange sound of animals, the odd position of his body, the various bugs flying around, and the wound on his back, the pain was at the forefront of his mind, the constant tingling of his flesh healing with the random wave of pain that came just before he managed to doze off, and the movement he made when he touched his wound kept him awake. Only at the end of the night did he finally fall asleep. 4. Recovering. Day 3. In the morning on the Great Plains of Pandora. "Fuck this shit," Liam yelled, more out of shock than anything, the muscle in his arms taut, holding one of the wood spears he made yesterday. He didn't have to wait long to test their effectiveness. Embedded halfway through the spear was a flying creature the size of a turkey, it was of a vibrant purple, and it was a stingbat. Even stabbed through the chest with red blood spurting out. It was alive, jerking around, wings flapping uselessly, mouth full of small needle-like teeth aggressively snapping, screeching, and the barb at the end of its tail trying to stab him in the face. Liam woke up not even 5 minutes ago, and the first thing he saw was that little shit flying straight at him. As such he took one of his spears out. More of a prevention than anything, but this creature kept flying in a straight line and impaled itself on it without him doing anything. Liam stayed in place and waited this way for half an hour. Until the stingbat finally stopped moving, its eyes half closed and body limp. Liam shook the spear to see if it was really dead. He sighed. Finally, it was dead. He slowly brought the carcass to him. Just as he was going to take it off the spear, the body spasmed. Right after, a high-pitched screech escaped its throat and its bladed tail sprung to his face, missing his left eye by a few millimeters only thanks to his reflex. It cut deeply into his left eyebrow, just as it did that Liam's palm met its face. A crack was heard. The skull caved in, the eyes popped out and the small carbon-reinforced vertebrae of the neck crumbled under the strength behind the hit. This time killing it for good. What the heck was wrong with that thing, he thought, flabbergasted by it all. Then he felt a stinging sensation on his left eye, accompanied by blood trickling down onto his face from his left eyebrow. There was a numbness around the wound like that of a bee sting. It was venomous, but the venom was to Liam nothing more than a bee sting. Great, it was a good way to wake up after a horrible night on an alien tree with barely any sleep thanks to another way worse injury. The said injury that was starting to close, 1/4 of it was now covered by dark scabs that were already falling to reveal scarred skin, and the muscles in the middle were rapidly healing. He touched his left eyebrow. This was likely going to scar. Not that he particularly cared, though now that he paid attention there was the start of a beard on his face, hair growing on his head, and also his chest. "I will look like a caveman if I don't already do," he remarked. He was also filthy, covered in dry blood, dirt, and remnants of sweat. He yawned quite loudly and focused back on the creature that he slapped to death. He took it off the spear. The body was still warm, and the smell of blood was strong. He turned it around, studying the physiology of the thing. It was different from anything he saw. He didn't know how he was going to prepare, but he would try. Liam wasn't going to cook it, that much he was sure. Making fire on the branch of a tree was not the best idea. At best he was going to cure the meat he could get, and cure it with the help of the sun, maybe also using some salt. Or he was going to straight up eat it raw. He was oh so fucking hungry. It was maddening, even if it hasn't even been that long. His incredible regeneration needed a lot of fuel, and a diet composed of plants wasn't going to cut it. Eating raw meat could be bad, but anything he could eat here could be bad and potentially deadly, so whatever. Taking in a more appropriate position on the branch, biting his lips at the pain from the movement. He placed the stingbat on its back right in the middle of the branch, then took out the seashell knife. It wasn't his first time preparing an animal he killed. He did rabbit, chicken, duck, and turkey at the farm of his grandfather. But here he didn't have the same tools, and it was a freaking alien birdbat thing. He wasn't going to touch any of the organs, only the limbs and muscles surrounding them. Those were the ones that interested him. And to be fair, it was kinda all there was to it. The following event was him carefully and methodically cutting around the articulation of the 6 limbs, cutting the membrane for flight, then the skin around the body, a little bit of fat, tendons, veins, and nerves until only the bone could be seen. All of it he did with a calm face. And the bones were blackish, reminding him of graphite. He simply twisted them one by one, and the limbs came right off. It was incredibly easy for him, but that wouldn't have been the case if he had the strength of a normal human. Each of the limbs was then placed in his inventory. He knew thanks to this that the bones had a lot of carbon in them, which explained their color. His attention shifted to the 2 strange tendrils that were growing from its chest around the holes the creature used to breathe. At the end of each was skin closed into the shape of burgeon. Cutting one open, he saw small pink tendrils covered with tiny white hair. "Ah," he uttered, recognizing what those things were. Those were the neuronal tendril thingy at the end of the neural queue of nearly every creature, such as the tall blue cat people aka Nausicaa from Pandora. He would like to say he couldn't make any hasty conclusion, but he was 99% sure he was on this particular moon in this particular sci-fi movie he saw when he was 12 years old. The thing was, he didn't remember much of the movie besides its incredible beauty, the one-dimensional evil corporate humans, and a crippled human soldier named Jake betraying the evil humans for a blue alien chick. And that those blue aliens were called Nausicaa and were spiritually and biologically connected with the flora and fauna and also a sort of deity vaguely similar to Gaia in concept. And that he was soon going to watch the two at the theater of his town. Until this happened. All of these thoughts were interrupted by his stomach grumbling, putting Liam back to the reality at hand. Storing the rest of the bat's body in his inventory, he took one of the legs. It was around the size of a turkey leg, with one swift move he peeled the skin right off till the start of the talon. The pink raw flesh with blood was far from enticing, he hesitated, but ultimately bit it and started eating. It was not good, to say the least. Yeah, it's raw, what did I expect? But that could be worse. Day 4. Liam woke up in the middle of the night, again thanks to his back injury and a nightmare of the moment when he climbed the tree from the great ostripede, but in it, his spine was cut. Opening his eyes he saw something that will forever be in his mind. A giant swarm of stingbats, some up to 3 meters in wingspan, were flying in the far distance. The sound of wings flapping, screeching, and short clicks echoed in the air, while their bioluminescent bodies covered half of the sky. They are eating everything like a locust, he let out horrified as he could see from up here a herd of tall 6-legged horses being consumed alive by the swarm. He didn't move, transfixed on the ongoing feeding frenzy that nothing organic could survive. Even members of the swarm were not spared from being part of the feast, and a third of it was self-consumed in a cannibalistic frenzy. It was madness. The only thing he could do was not move and wait and hope till they fly away, as far as possible. And they eventually did, and he could finally calm down. Nothing could go against that but bombs and fires. Day 5. Finally. Finally, I can move. Ah, my back. Fuck, Liam cheered, then cried in pain before swearing. It felt so good to be able to stand up and not keel over from the pain. He forgot for a moment he still was very much injured. It was just closed, leaving a 50-ish centimeter long scar running diagonally along his back, but inside the flesh was still regenerating and the flesh tender. Same for his left eyebrow, it scarred as he anticipated, but it was barely noticeable and didn't impede the supercilium from growing. The one thing he was glad and surprised by was that he didn't get any infection. This was thanks to his superior immune system and that his body was inhospitable, so to say, with bacteria, viruses, and parasites of all kinds. Another thing he was happy about was that Pandora didn't possess mosquitoes or flies, or at least ones that were interested in humans. There were still plenty of chitin-covered critters, such that during the night he saw bioluminescent wasps the size of a sparrow flying amidst the plain. Those were hellfire wasps, not that he knew their name. For him, they were just big-ass to not be stung by. Calming down, he sat down, his stomach grumbled, and he extended his, taking the piece of stingbat's jerky meat seasoned with goat horns, the plant. Far from being good but infinitely better than raw meat, the seasoning is mainly the cause of this better taste. The herb had a slight hint of curry too. This meat didn't come from the one he killed 2 days ago, it was already eaten. It was from yesterday. 2 of those bats attacked him at the same time. One swift spear strike at the head followed by a second on the other bat, and both were dead. This time he double-tapped to make sure they were truly dead, however. Free meat, it was that, well, until more than 2 or 3 come, and then the table will be turned. He only had so many hands. This was why, since he now could move, he was going to build a nest where he slept, an idea he got when he saw the swarm and realized how vulnerable he was. And it could be beneficial. This nest was based on weaver birds' nests but adapted to humans, a type of bird that didn't exist anymore in this universe. The next 20 minutes was him thinking about how to build it. With the knowledge of architecture he possessed from the engrams and the new ways his mind worked, it wasn't hard to exactly visualize a first schema and further elaborate and modify it to suit his needs. At the end of the day he had mostly finished. It formed a protective sphere of woods and grass carefully woven together and attached to multiple branches with ropes, 2 entrances or exits, one below and another above, both with no doors at the moment. It was far from being good in his opinion, there were many places to improve. He was a perfectionist in some aspects. While at it he also finished the bed he started some time ago. There was also the possibility of carving the trunk for him to sleep in, but Liam needed better tools than what he currently has. Punching worked but could break fingers, he knew he tried, and that's why a 6 cm fist mark and fissures in the bark were behind him. His 3 broken fingers with the help of splints were healed in less than a day. The most abnormal part for him was how breaking them didn't hurt as much as it should, and he lacked the fear of hurting himself, if that made sense. He worked with speed and efficiency. The resources in his possession he collected before he was attacked only helped, but he was running out of them. In the same manner, if he was running out of water, aloe vera, tomorrow he will go down the tree. Ah! It won't be easy. I have so much to do, Liam mumbled, eyes gazing sadly upon the mesmerizing sunset of Pandora, accompanied by the millions of stars in the clear sky of any pollution from the interstices of the branches and woven plant fiber. A deep feeling of homesickness in his heart. He must have missed his aunt's birthday, and he wondered how his loved ones must feel. All of his thoughts were soon eclipsed by his falling into a deep dreamless sleep. 5. Exploration. Day 6. A human could be seen slowly and carefully climbing down a tree. Liam sighed to himself as his bare foot touched the grass and fresh soil. Walking on the ground after nearly a week of being contained to a branch was strange. Breathing in and out he moved around the tree. His eyes stayed longer over the hole made by the great ostropede claw before focusing on the plain surrounding him. The first order was to find water. Food could wait as he had all of it in his inventory, to avoid having it stolen by an animal, and he saw where he could get some, but that would require him to hunt. Liam chose the direction opposite from the hole in the tree. He was going to use the tree and the area surrounding it as his home base for the moment and the foreseeable future. I will need to put up landmarks or find ones, the human thought while walking. The possibility of getting lost was not out of the equation. He didn't hold any attachment to the tree or what he built on out, but getting lost was always bad. The human then passed the next few hours exploring, collecting various plants, notably the Pandorian aloe vera. He saw 6-legged horses in the far distance and various alien birds. He collected 100 or so kilos of fresh clay, something that he needed, mostly to begin metalworking. The clay was at the root of a tree next to the deep and large entrance of a grotto leading to the unknown depth of Pandora. A small part of him was urging to jump just to see what would happen, but he controlled it. All around the plant life was lusher, in great contrast compared to the savanna-like environment around. It made him think of those same grottos on Earth that sometimes housed swarms of bats or flocks of small birds. This was a worrying hypothesis, and very likely the truth. The swarm he saw some times ago is living here. This was bad, but he could hear the soft runoff of water, which was excellent news. There was liquid water. Well, that was what he hoped for. He knew it's acid, and another thing that piqued his interest was a strange and unknown element in the clay. He remembered something about a precious metal tied to the plot. It was called unobtaenite, unobtainium, or something, a silly name, and the reason why he will call it Pandorium. In all case it was important information to know where it was and a supposedly precious resource. He was going to come back later with adequate equipment and preparation. This will be dangerous, but if it doesn't take risks he will not progress. And that was the opposite of what he wanted. Stagnation was a death sentence. Looking in the sky, Liam saw the position of the sun and decided it was time to step back to the base. He did go quite far and was a little tired. His thirst and hunger were satisfied by what he had in his inventory. Something's wrong. He instinctively took one of his spears out, one as long as he was tall and ending with a sharp stone, while at the same time, he took in a defensive position as he heard the rustling of grass from his right, then his left. It was something he thought of as possible but had nothing to do with it happening but brute forcing his way through. All plans crumbled the moment they became effective. After all. Calm down, Liam. Liam thought. His heart pumped more blood in his body in a strange mix of excitement and palpitation. Instincts and muscle memories he never had on Earth but are now a part of him, being the guiding force behind his calmness and confidence at this exact moment. His facial expression hardened and he focused on his senses. He heard the very faint sound of paws hitting the soil and stomping on vegetation. The two creatures were encircling him, one smaller than the other. This standstill continued for what felt like an eternity until one acted. Having had enough of waiting, the young and inexperienced male viper wolf hidden in the tall grass growled and took its chance. It ran and leaped at the human from the back, maw wide open, showing rows of sharp teeth and fangs ready to shred and tear apart Liam's neck. Liam spun on himself, ignoring the slight pain from his back that was not fully healed yet, the spear in his left hand gaining momentum as he did so. This was followed by his left arm flexing and the spear was thrown right at the young viper wolf. The spear flew through the air, and the viper wolf that decided to attack could but make a strangled whimper mixed with a bark. The spear penetrated one of its opercula and then its ribs, missing its heart by a few centimeters but not everything around as the stone head broke apart. The power of the throw was still enough to let the damaged spear piece through the viper wolf belly by half a meter before finally stopping, effectively skewering it as the dying animal fell to the ground bleeding profusely. A strangely emotional howl of grief followed and the bigger one remaining slowly walked out of the tall grass 4 meters away from him. It was a female, it was of a deep yellow, 1 meter, 3 feet 3, tall and 2 meters, 6 feet 6, in length. An impressive animal, it was muscular, lean, and ready to pounce at him at any moment. And it was glaring at Liam. Its gaze was far from being even remotely sapient, yet he could however detect vague emotions close to sadness in its 4 green eyes. It was sad, but he didn't feel compassion toward any of the two, and why should he? Would you feel compassion toward something that wants to reap and eat your entrails, preferably while you're still conscious? Maybe some would, but Liam wasn't part of those. Things trying to kill him didn't sit right with him. Sadly for the female viper wolf, the only chance it got to kill Liam was when it was with its cub, and even then it was informed. Now however, it had no chance at all. The female knew it, its instincts conflicted. On one side it tells to run, but on the other, it yelled to kill the creature in front of it at all costs, and it was backed by what the creature just did. The same instinct pushed the duo to attack Liam, and this same instinct won. Then so be it. It's its choice, even if its behavior is strange, the human thought calmly but with alertness, as he saw how the viper wolf body language changed to something more aggressive and threatening, a position only a cornered animal will take. You never underestimate a creature backed against a corner. Never. You destroy it before it fights back, well, at least in theory. A spear in all points similar to the one he threw earlier appeared in his left hand. The viper wolf didn't wait and directly attacked. Liam didn't stay idle. The spear in his hand was thrown immediately with deadly accuracy. This time it had more power as it was not thrown in the heat of the moment. The viper wolf didn't have the time to dodge. The spear moved faster than its eyes could perceive, and even if it had the capability it couldn't have dodged. The spear lodged itself right in one of the beast's opercula and continued its course as it flew right through its belly from the inside, deeply embedding itself in the ground, trapping the female viper wolf. However, it wasn't dead and wildly trashing, growling, snapping its jaws. It was a pretty disturbing sight. Another spear appeared in his left hand from his implant and he walked carefully toward the female viper wolf. With one single thrust he perforated its brain case, killing it for good. He did the same for the smaller viper wolf. Letting them suffer more was simply cruel and pointless, as well as a waste of time. Guess that's what I'll eat tonight. May you too become something smarter and have more luck in your next life if you have any, Liam mumbled. Taking out his 2 bloodied spears he stored them. The smell of blood was heavy in the air. He studied the 2 corpses. They were ugly in his opinion. Crouching in front of the smaller viper wolf he gripped its head. The body started to slowly but progressively distort, then it was sucked into the inventory. It's amazing. The level of ingenuity and manpower used to design this device. He was fascinated by the implant. He didn't directly have the blueprint of it, but with everything he knew around he understood how it functioned and what is probably needed to create one. Someone else will also be amazed, shell-shocked, or whatever they will feel about this piece of technology that would not be dissimilar to magic, but never would they truly appreciate what was done behind it to make it happen. Then he did the same to the female viper wolf. This one took more than 2 minutes to be put into the inventory. The shape, size, mass, and density of an object he wanted to store affected greatly the time needed to store it. And it didn't stop time. Cracking his knuckles, Liam's gray eyes fell upon one of the 2 puddles of blood left from the viper wolves' bodies. He was thinking about what he just did, but it was life, some died while some survived. He wasn't going to let himself die for some alien hexapod mutts. He then looked up at the sun, hand shielding his eyes. He noticed he was getting short on time. He didn't have a watch, and from what he knew the day and night circles were far different than Earth, but he should have a good 3 hours before the sunset. Jogging back a dozen kilometers without pauses to his base, he arrived with a body covered in a thin sheet of sweat thanks to the intense ray of the sun, his breathing slightly ragged and his body still ready to do another dozen kilometers. My stamina is insane. Now. I will need to bleed the bodies and skin, butcher them, cut an area of all grass, and then light a fire before dinner. And all of it while being careful of any fucker that might want to tear me a new one. Seem easy enough, he thought with sarcasm, but it was needed as the rest of the day passed without a hitch or problem. The reason? Any creature that might have been a problem either fled or was eaten by the swarm of stingbats, or was too afraid to remotely approach him and the tree as it reeked of his smell and presence. Preparing the 2 viper wolves was not easy but a great learning experience. He tried his best to not damage the hide and mostly succeeded. While he skinned, he would need it. The tendons and bones too will be of great use. As usual, he kept the internal organs such as the guts in his inventory for later use, such as using them as future fertilizer. A waste of food, it disheartened him, but he couldn't thoroughly clean those types of organs and it was an unnecessary risk to eat those parts. Same as for the damaged part of the hides, but he preferred those minor inconveniences over being injured because he wanted the cleanest kill with the less damage possible. And not forgetting that most of the internal organs were ruptured, skewered by the spears, and as such not exactly good and safe for consumption. 6. Bye-bye Stone Age. 3 days later. Day 9. Should be hot enough, Liam thought. In front of him was a primitive clay forge, within it was a ceramic crucible that contained molten tin and copper. It was a slow and tedious process of breaking stones, melting everything, waiting till it cooled down, taking the copper and tin of what was melted, and rinse and repeat until he got something usable, but thanks to this he got 1.5 kilos of bronze. It's not much in his point of view, but that's a start, and he still has more stones rich in copper and tin. Sadly he didn't find iron in any substantial quantity to be useful. He could make a nail, and this iron could basically be considered steel. He picked the crucible by its handle with a multi-layered glove made of stingbat's hide, and carefully poured the molten alloy into a clay mold. It was in the shape of a tear-shaped blade. He was casting a spearhead. Spear, a category of weapon he loved since he was a kid. Not only did he find them cool but also because factually spears are if not the best handheld edged weapon in mankind's history. They could also be used as a ranged weapon in some cases, and the body of the spear could be used as a quarterstaff. Really sticks with pointy ends were that let humanity conquers the world and each other. And with his strength a spear with metal heads of any kind will do serious damage. He only needed to get better at wielding the weapon itself. Not that this was unique to spears, for him wielding a fantasy-type war hammer was even possible. However, the weapons he wielded had more chance of breaking than anything else. Weapons made for average humans were overall unadapted for him. A bronze spearhead was a very good start, and he will do more than one spear. It could break and he was going to throw them. He won't stop himself from using his inventory to the fullest of his capabilities. Now Liam needed to wait for it to cool down. He was casting metal, there was no need to repeatedly beat it with a hammer. Turning his head, his stomach grumbled at the sight of the viper wolf's meat smoking above a small fire in a small makeshift smokehouse made of clay bricks, stones, wood, and large leaves. Way better than sun curing, and there was no chance for his food to be stolen. All the grass around the tree was cut, to avoid some fiery accident. Speaking of fire making, it was surprisingly easy to him. It was made even easier to keep it alive with an excellent fuel in the form of a type of wood rich in carbon. Eating his fill, which was quite a lot, and he still felt he could eat more. Liam put an uneven ball of raw copper and tin in another ceramic crucible and then in the forge for another casting. Now he needed to wait until it was molten. Then he simply sat on a pile of dirt in front of the forge. His specimen implant glowed for a brief second and a piece of pearl white wood appeared in his left hand. he also took out his trusty black seashell knife and started to carve the piece of wood into the handle of a knife. The blade was going to be one of the female viper wolf's fangs. They were long at least 20 centimeters, 8 inches, serrated, and oddly metallic. At the moment the one he was going to use was cleaned of the blood vessels, nerves, pulps, and the like. The other body parts of the viper wolves or anything from animals he killed, he was going and planned to use couldn't be, or more appropriately shouldn't be used right after the kill as they could rot and cause other problems later down the line. It's a generality but one that must be taken into consideration. The most evident being the skin of animals and the long process needed for it to be turned into leather. It wasn't a game with materials that magically transform with the push of a button, it was real life, his life. It put things into perspective how easy life was on Earth, every little convenience such as food in the supermarket to a green LED garland for example. This random and mostly useless item came from long and complicated chains that led to others long and complicated chains for its creation and then to be sold. Humanity was like a superorganism, one with some little self-destructive tendencies but still. And he needed to recreate everything from scratch. It will be hard. He was freer than he ever was here, but freedom came at a cost. Finished. Maybe I'll carve some animals in it after I polish it. Maybe one of those hexapod wolves with a regular wolf, Liam thought. It was simply an aesthetic touch but it was good for his mental health. Storing the handle in his inventory he focused back on the now molten bronze. He had work to do. 2 weeks later. Day 23. Liam's left hand was deep into the soil, his implant humming as the ground was slowly getting absorbed within his inventory. He was finishing digging the pitfall for a particular creature he grew to hate more and more. He was going to kill the great ostropede by his own hands, he promised himself that, and he was going to hold it to the end. However, he wasn't going to play fair, he was going to stack all the odds in his favor. Taking his hand out of the dirt he shook it and the thrum and glow of the implant receded. He had a sort of overheat, he couldn't absorb dirt indefinitely, as far he knew he could take 2 tons, and 2 tons out before needing to let his survivor implant cool down. He wasn't dumb enough to test the upper limit, not that they weren't inbuilt safety but it was still dumb to test something like this here. In the wild of an alien world. Whipping the sweat off his forehead, looking up at the position of the sun, the gas giant right next to this site slowly but surely became familiar and he didn't know how to feel about that. At the moment, he was only wearing a pair of pants, and as such dirt covered his bare muscular, and tanned upper body. His waist-long brown hair was put in dreadlocks themselves put in a ponytail, his beard was shaved and all in all, he tried to take care of how he looked to a certain degree. He still looked like a caveman but what could he do but accept this fact? It's not like there was anyone to judge him, it's not like he would have cared either. At his waist attached to his skin belt was a small ceramic pot full of glowing worms he found underground since he had started a farm. Earthworms, even if glowing and probably deadly for human consumption, should prove helpful for improving the soils. Or even use them as bait. Shaking his head Liam looked proudly at what he did, a 6 meter, 20 feet, deep and 8 meter, 26 feet, long by 7 meters, 23 feet, large rectangular hole in the ground, a smaller hole in it that led to the outside and woods with bricks supporting everything in place. It was a pit. A trapping pit to be exact, one he could jump over with ease, his body being superior in all points to any Olympic athlete seen in the history of mankind. He was inhuman in those aspects to put it simply. The only things he lacked were their experience and deep knowledge about their own body's limits and capabilities. He was still learning and discovering new things every day about his body capabilities. Muscle memories and instincts also helped. He wasn't risking running on the roof of the pit and falling in it while he played the living bait. Even with nothing in his inventory, he wasn't particularly lightweight. A bronze ground tamperer appeared in his left hand and he compacted the dirt at the bottom of the pit until all of it was hard and flat. Crawling up through the tunnel he ran back the 10 or so kilometers of distance to his base, his bare feet leaving deep footprints with the inventory weight. There had been many changes too, one of the most noticeable and permanent ones as he was continually working on improving what he had instead of being content and getting complacent. It was a brick well closed by a trapdoor leading straight to a water table 24 meters below and it was right next to the tree. When he discovered it he was euphoric, to say the least, and felt a bit dumb that what he was searching for was right beneath his feet. Crystal clear drinkable water at the bottom explained the tree and how vibrant it was. Since the first day he was here it never rained once, not that he was an expert on trees, even less on alien trees. The only thing missing was a piping system with a water pump to have a semblance of running water, but that was more of a luxury than a true necessity for his current lifestyle. But he will do it. Depositing all of the dirt, stones, and gravels each on its separate pile, he quickly cleaned himself, ate, and drank. He then took what he needed for a camouflaged roof and other miscellaneous materials to satisfy his perfectionist side before he ran back to the trap pit. 2 days later. Day 25. Liam was checking if everything at the pitfall trap was ready. He was wearing a cuirass armor made of bone, hide, wood, and bronze that protected most of his back, and a bronze helmet that also partially protected his nape without impeding his movement. Arm guards were made of wood and bones, with one having a random carving of a panda, and a pair of pants made of viper wolf hide with some protection in the form of bronze plates protecting the major artery of the legs, and that was essentially it. He didn't wear shoes as he ran faster without them. It felt more natural too. Wearing armor resonated strangely good with a part of him he didn't know he had, and felt just like your everyday clothing. All in all, it was light armor and won't stop even a bear from mauling him to death if he doesn't punch the bear to death before. Metaphor aside, it was more here to protect against indirect hits from the great ostropede. The type of hit that practically made him a paraplegic and would have sealed his fate to a long, slow, and painful death. Everything seems in order, he thought, as he just finished checking everything. The pit was nearly invisible as he camouflaged the surroundings similar to the pit trap's ceiling itself. Doing some jump tests over the pit just to be sure, Liam then jogged to one of the spots where the greatest trap should be. He studied the alien bird, where it moved during the day and night, what it ate, and slept, and its behavior and patterns, even if the last few days he has seen some minor changes in these patterns. All from far away without getting noticed. Not that it was hard. The great bird lacked eyes and was mostly unaware of its surroundings, as it was the strongest animal in a 50-kilometer radius, and one of the strongest land, period. As such, a healthy adult of this species had nearly no natural predator. 2 hours later. Hidden within tall dry grass was a human. Liam took out his sling and a small ovoid lead pebble. In front of him was a field with tall bushes full of black star-shaped fruit, and around 100 meters, 328 feet, away his target was eating from one such bush with the help of its massive claws. Putting the lead pebble into the pouch of the sling, Liam stood up and started spinning the sling. It rapidly became a blur to the eyes. He was putting just enough force and speed to reach the sling limit, only a little less, before it broke apart. His ethereal gray eyes focused on the great ostrich, who was more of a dot from this distance, but a dot he could see in clear detail. It was a long shot, but one he trained himself to be able to do, a feat he wouldn't have been able to accomplish before. 3, 2, 1, 0. And fire, he thought, fully concentrated and focused. The sling was ripped apart, cracking the air as if it was thunder like a whip would, and the pebble was hurled into the air with an even louder crack. All of his body flexed as a mere second later a squawk of primal rage was heard, the lead pebble having perforated the membrane of one of the great ostropede's back wings. It was scanning its surrounding wing, flared in aggression. "Hey, son of a bitch! Do you remember me? Come here!" He screamed at the top of his lungs and instantly turned back and sprinted to where his trap was as fast as his legs could carry him. 7. Vengeance. A man wearing light armor could be seen running away from a 5-meter-tall pissed-off bird. Pure rage was visible in the 3 remaining eyes of the great ostropede, rage from this insolent pest trespassing in its territory, and both occasions injuring it. Not forgetting the instinctual need to kill the human. It clearly remembered Liam. "It's catching up, fast." As I supposed, Liam remarked, a part of his mind worried and terrified about the insanity of what he was doing, while another part enjoyed the flow of pure adrenaline that was flowing through his bloodstream. Deep footprint marks were left behind by each of the human steps. The wind whipped against his face, and his spring between each step increased as his ears picked up the rapidly approaching great ostropede. It was faster than the first time, or it wanted to kill him even more. Weaving in the tall grass he jumped over a small six-legged tapir-like creature. It was a tapirus. Small, docile even to humans, slow herbivorous creatures, they were the perfect prey, and by Liam's experience their meat tasted like a strange and unique mix of chicken and venison. A dozen seconds later the tapirus squealed in fright as the clawed feet of the great ostropede missed its head by a hair's breadth. Ignoring the six-legged tapir, the great ostropede pursued Liam, occasionally emitting a sharp and shrill sound that was only amplified by the crest on its head. The pursuit continued for a quarter of an hour. Time was meaningless to Liam. Only taking deep regular breaths, ignoring the slight ache in his legs, running and dodging the occasional hit mattered. Anything else was but a useless distraction. Not like his adrenaline-fueled brain could have cared about much more either way. Rapidly approaching the pitfall trap, he remarked he was going to have to jump it diagonally thanks to the wood pole he placed as marks, meaning a longer jump. The hair on his neck stood up as a swipe of the great isotropede claw barely missed his neck, shredding a big chunk out of the hide protection for the neck, and he felt pain as the claw nicked a part of his skin, drawing a bit of blood. A few more centimeters and his head would have flown. This spurred him to run with even more vigor. Right before he walked on the pit's roof composed of branches, leaves, grass, and a bit of clay, he pushed as much force as he could and jumped. The feeling of being airborne was short-lived. Landing on the other side, his feet dug deep into the dry soil, leaving a trail and a small cloud of dust and leaves. Catching his breath, he looked behind, and a large borderline maniacal smile found its way on his roguishly handsome face as the great ostropede was 1 foot above the pitfall. Asterisk squawk. Asterisk. A surprised squawk escaped from its beak as it was taken aback, falling metaphorically and literally into a human trick one more and final time. Falling forward, its momentum stopped any possible attempts of escape. The thin camouflaged roof broke apart, revealing the 6 meters, 19 feet 7, of air below. Gravity took effect and the great ostropede fell. Its speed and weight made it land hard on the compacted ground, leaving a large cloud of dust that was immediately blown by the wind. Its left knee was bent the wrong way, the skin shifting in its shape as the great ostrape desperately tried to stand up, repeatedly failing. Pain, incomprehension, panic, and fear extinguished the rage it had a second before. In an instant their place switched. It was tricked again, but this time it was the last. Liam was surprised by how well the bird was after such a fall. It only had visible from the outside a dislocated articulation, one that crippled it. A death sentence in the wild. But compared to, for example, for an animal of the same overall bulk as a giraffe, the result after such a high fall with such speed and force would have been way worse and bloodier than just a dislocated knee, tears in muscles and tendons. It proved how terrifyingly resilient the giant bird was. Yet it was enough. The trap worked. He never thought once it would have killed it either. It wasn't made with that intention in mind, otherwise, it would have been deeper with bronze and wooden spikes at the bottom. A wave of relief flooded his mind at the realization he had successes doing this impossibly reckless plan without much of an injury but a small gash in the back of his head and some scraps in his bare feet. It worked, he did it, but he didn't cheer yet. You mustn't sell the pelt of the bear before killing it. The great ostropede, while wounded, was perfectly able to defend itself and kill him if he messed up. And no small part of him enjoyed the show. This creature had tormented his mind for what felt like an eternity and caused him physical trauma that only increased the first point. The soft orange hue of his specimen implant glowed brighter in response to his emotions. This feeling, however, was ignored as Liam wasted no time and didn't want to risk anything. Desperation is a double-edged sword that led down to dangerous prospects. He took out a 2.3 meter, 7 feet 5, long spear entirely made out of bronze, a spear a lone regular human wouldn't even be able to wield effectively, but it was perfectly adapted for someone like him. With a grip strong enough to break bones on his spear, he took on a throwing stance similar to a javelin thrower, muscle flexing. His eyes locked onto the head of the great ostropede. It was heavily moving around, forcing him to orient himself as to even if he missed, the spear would hit one of the breathing holes, operculum, around the base of its neck. Grunting, he threw the spear, driving as much force and power as he could. His hate for the beast only added to it. The air whistled as the bronze spear left his hand and flew through the air faster than normal human eyes could perceive. The great ostripede dodged, causing the spear to miss its mark by milliliters, but still cutting through the only good eyes on the bird's left side. It continued its course by perforating the thin flap of skin of the operculum. And like a hot knife through butter, it speared through the chest cavity, shredding an air sac, a lung, the secondary heart, then the gut to get out on the other side and continue to dig in the ground for 2 times the spear length. Blood spurted from both ends in abandon. Liam from above stared at the damage he caused, slightly stupefied, his gaze transfixed on the bloody hole where he could perceive some of the organs. The rapid beating of the main heart was for him to see. He did this. It was gruesome, extremely perturbing, sickening, even yet he was about unfazed as one could get, and this was the most perturbing to him. He changed in ways he would have preferred not to, but that's life, and whining would be of no use. This didn't stop him from bringing another bronze spear from his inventory. At the same time, the great ostripede froze, its brain slowly processing what unfolded before it truly acknowledged it was going to die. The wings on its back weakly flared and it emitted an impossibly high-pitched screech amplified by its crest. A cry it could only do once in its life. It signified its imminent and inevitable death or a great loss. In all cases the one emitting it was doing an act not dissimilar to suicide. Tortsingawik, an extremely rare event, that was how the Nausicaa of the Great Pandorian Plains called it, the last wail or cry of a Tsaltsping/Great Ostripede, and the last sound one will ever hear if too close to the epicenter. A cry that will resonate far and wide in its territory and beyond. Filled with despair and resentment, the cries also meant it failed to protect its progeny. Liam clutched his helmet, his spear escaped his grasp and tumbled on the ground as a silent scream of agony left his throat. Falling to his knee, he instinctively stored the bronze helmet and tried to muffle the sound by putting his hands against his ears. It was ineffective. His mind felt like his head was split apart, and boiling acid was poured right into his brain. The capillary in his eyes popped one after another, reddening his vision, blood trickling down his nose soon followed by his ears leaking blood. Right after this, he could only hear a low whistle mixed with white noise, and his eardrums busted. He needed to do something. His bloodshot eyes fixated on the great ostripede's suicidal cry. A dam inside him broke, and his implant glowed brighter than it ever did. While his pain-riddled mind, fully focused on the slowly dying bird, all the frustration and tumultuous emotions he bottled up since his forceful arrival exploded and the tight hold he had for the last few weeks on his rationality slipped. All hell broke loose. Like a rabid animal he lashed out at the closest living being to him, the great ostripede, and also one of the greatest sources of his suffering. He wanted the pain to stop. It was the only thing on his mind. Rhea, Liam yelled, something raw and primal, then jumped from where he stood with no care for the height and latched onto the head of the bird. Its 2 remaining eyes were as bloodshot as his and ready to pop at any moment, with its eardrums also busted and blood leaking from every orifice. Never once did the screeching stop, and it was felt by Liam's body rapidly heating up. A fist was raised in the air, then brought down onto the wide-open goat-like eyes of the bird, making it explode. Another first followed with even more force. A crack was heard, then another and another. Liam continued to pummel the head of the great ostripede, venting all he had kept bottled up inside in a show of extreme violence. At some point, the screech stopped as his fist broke the skull and pummeled the brain, and the bird stopped moving. It was dead, but this didn't stop the bloodied form of the human as he continued to punch and punch what was once a head, uncaring of the pain in his hands. Yet after long minutes each punch progressively lost in aggression and force until they ultimately stopped. He was breathing heavily, catching up on stamina. "I want to go home," Liam said, his voice lashed with weariness and containing a certain hollowness. He was mentally drained. His hearing was coming back as his eardrum healed, but it was not enough for him to notice the tone of his voice. A headache was also present, but manageable enough for him to ignore it. Looking down at his hand, he saw the skin on his knuckle partially shredded. They were swollen, bruised, and covered in his blood mixed with blood, brain matter, bones fragment, and flesh of the great ostripede. He blinked in confusion as clear droplets fell onto his wounded hands. "I'm crying," he thought, chuckling at that revelation, a bittersweet feeling in his heart. He felt better, lighter in a way. It was strange. He was both sad and happy. Standing up, he hopped off the bird's head. The skull was split open, the crest shattered, and the smell of blood was thick in the air and the only thing he could smell. He wasn't horrified by what he just did, he knows he should to at least a degree, but he wasn't maybe too mentally exhausted to truly care. And letting all of his emotion go and venting everything out was freeing. Now he needed to take care of the body, not wanting even amid his current state to let it go to waste. Then his gaze fell upon the claws of the bird protectively laid against its chest. From a sort of skin pouch reminding him of what marsupials had, he saw it before but shrugged it on alien biology and didn't think much of it. Apparently, he should have as a black ovoid shape mottled with blue spots was poking out of it. 8. Loss and gain. An egg, Liam thought in disbelief. The egg was poking out of a sort of pouch and seemed perfectly intact. An idea flashed in his mind, he was going to try and hatch it. At best he got a partner pet mount and at worst he got fertilizer for his plants. He never tried to tame the animals of this world. First, it wasn't going to be like the main method in the game where he knocks them out and force feeds them their favorite food while they are unconscious. Second, most creatures seemingly wanted him torn to shred and in their stomach. One of the rare exceptions to these rules was the tapirus. The problem was, even if he managed to tame one, which would be fairly easy, what was the point? If it was for using them for labor like horses, he was both stronger and faster than them without the need to be trained, so it was pointless. The other option was to use them as a food source. For that, he needed a breeding pair, if not multiple, and invest time and resources. He didn't really have all of this for minimal if not negative gain throughout a long period of time. And in both cases he will have to protect them 24/7, otherwise they would be eaten by a predator. It simply wasn't worth it. And when he took an endeavor like this he took responsibility. However, in the great ostripede case, or wolverine bird as Liam called it, it was worth a try. He may hate the beast but he also respected it, and it was sad to let the egg here. It's kinda fucked up though, Liam remarked. He was going to raise the hatchling after having killed the father or mother. Walking around the huge claws, a shudder went down his scarred spine at their proximity. Phantom pain washes over him for a split second. He took out a dagger with a viper wolf's fang for a blade and delicately started cutting the pouch open. The inside of it reminded him of soundproof foam. It explained how the egg was intact. Putting the palm of his left hand against the smooth eggshell he focused on his inventory. The biology of animals on this moon never ceased to amaze and surprise him, the latter point leading to an event such as the suicidal screech. While he waited for the watermelon-sized egg to be stored in his inventory he looked up at the sky, and if his face wasn't covered in blood and grim the rapid paling of his tanned skin would have been noticeable. All around in the sky, he saw black-purple spots flying. They were stingbats, forming each a swarm of 1,000 individuals, and all those swarms formed one bigger than he ever saw. So much so that they blocked the sun and the world darkened. It didn't take a genius to understand why this was happening. The screech woke them up. It was the middle of the day and those giant psychopathic bats with literal pea-sized brains at the earliest and latest were out lat in the dawn or early in the twilight. Fuck, he swore, it was bad, extremely so, and even more considering 24 bats dived right where he was while he was internally urging the speed at which he was storing the egg while gritting his teeth at the increasing headache. Storing it was a delicate process, not helped by the thing in question being as large as his torso. It could store living beings but only if they lacked a great deal of sentience and were immobile, or if he had access to cryopods. What was he doing out of greed and stupid? Maybe, probably, but he didn't want to lose the egg, not after everything he had undergone, and it would leave an unpleasant aftertaste in his mouth. He would have killed the beast and gotten injured for literally nothing. It would be a loss on all points. He didn't want that. He hated losing, as childish as it sounded. One bat chirped and recklessly plunged at him, its maw full of sharp teeth wide open. It slammed against the claw above, caving its skull and dying on spot. Another followed, this time weaving around the claws. Thrusting his dagger he stabbed the bat in the head, killing it. He then flicked the dagger of the body in blood. Another flew in, followed by 2 others. One screeched next to his ears, making the newly regrown and sensitive eardrum ring painfully while trying to claw and bite at his armored back. Thanks to whatever deities those little shit were, beyond retarded. It barely leaves any scratch marks on the bronze cuirass. The egg finally vanished into his inventory. it only took 7 seconds, but that was a time he didn't really have, and Liam beyond pissed grabbed the bat by the upper jaws, uncaring for the small cut he got from the needle-like teeth, and then he slammed it against the claw behind him, crushing its spine and insides. Bloodied dagger in hand, he jumped over the great ostropede arm, slashing the wing of an approaching one, making waver and fall. There were too many of them. He threw the toothed dagger he held in his right hand at another bat, the force of the throw still enough to kill another one behind and cripple a last one on its fall. 3 bats, 1 dagger. After that, he covered the short distance between him and the hole he dug to walk up in less than a second. Inside, he tore off the wood support and backed away as it collapsed, crushing 3 more stingbats and sealing this exit with a heavy dust cloud, only one left to go. Using his implant as a flashlight, he arrived on the other side and did the same as before, sealing himself 6 meters, 19 feet 7, under. There were not a lot of places, but enough for him to sit, his back against a wood beam. Now that he was in a safe place, he reviewed what happened. It was all his fault, yet at the same time it wasn't. He couldn't have predicted that. In all cases, he could and should have done better. It also was a reminder that the control he thought he had was illusory. The bats at the moment were surely feasting on one another and his prize. He refrained himself from punching anything out of frustration. Anger was still present. And this fucking headache was not helping him in the slightest. He couldn't do anything but let it happen. It was life. Slowly breathing in and out, he calmed down a bit and focused on his inventory, where the egg was put in stasis, where all biological activities were slowed down to a crawl, and it was fertilized from the information he got in the scan. Fundamentally, he didn't lose much. He gained, in fact. The hide and meat of the giant bird were just that, meat and hide, but the egg, if he got it to hatch and raised the baby to full maturity. This made him slightly giddy at the idea to ride and command one such creature. But it was for the future. A skin gourd full of crystal clear water appeared in his left hand and he poured it on his hands, cleaning them. The swell was already gone and his skin and muscle fibers slowly regenerated. In 1 or 2 days they will look as good as new. He drank the rest before taking another one and pouring it down his head, laughing in contentment, feeling the pain of the headache lower a bit. After eating at least a good kilo of smoked papyrus meat that was marinated in various aromatic herbs. After finishing eating, he dozed off and fell asleep, all mental fatigue hitting him like a truck. Sleeping while in extreme pain was something he was accustomed to. A bronze dagger was tightly kept in the palm of his hand and his armor was still on. Day 26. Liam woke, and his mind cleared, the smell of earth and blood prevailing in the tunnel. His hearing was back, and what a joy it was to not have the continuous buzzing and ringing noise of broken radio in the background. Moving up to the lower exit leading to the pitfall, he started to dig his way out, adding wood beams to not get buried alive, and 5 minutes later he was happy to see it was the middle of the day. His eyes landed on a skeleton, the great ostropede, the bones nearly cleaned of all things remotely fleshy, blood soaked the soil, and was accompanied by smaller half-destroyed stingbat skeletons. Might as well use what's left, Liam said, his hand trailing over the bigger claws of the right arm. It was needle-like, sharp, and longer than he was tall. He observed this bird sharpen its own claws against various stones, and overall take great care of them. It was a highly intelligent animal, close if not superior to crows in that same department. Twisting the base of the claws, it came right off. There was a bit of blood. Holding it high, he remarked how light it was, for him that is. He then collected all of the others, even from the feet and legs. Those things might as well be made of steel, Liam thought on his way back to his base while he fiddled with a small hook-shaped claw from one of the 2 protoback wing fingers. He couldn't conclude without further information, but the main element in the claws and their concentration made him think with the data he had that those things were some kind of biologically made steel, somehow. It also meant that the great ostropede had a way to get iron. He supposed that when he observed, but it was more of a dumb hypothesis and for it to be the actual case. Well, considering everything from this planet with a spine had carbon fiber reinforced bone, it might not be that crazy. Not like there is some kind of brain juice that gives biological immortality. Anyway, he wasn't a biologist, but that didn't stop him from acknowledging how insane the biology of Pandora was and both marveling at it or hating it depending on the situation. The rest day went over with Liam going and coming from his base to the pitfall, recuperating a big part of the giant bird skeleton, 2 bronze spears, and a toothed knife. He wasn't going to forget about them, the spear in particular. Bronze was a pain in the ass to get, losing this much was a no in his book. The day was shorter, not a strange occurrence, quite the contrary. The day and night circle of Pandora was chaotic from an earthling point of view, to say the least, and this without taking into consideration the seemingly random solar eclipse by the gas giant. And even then he found it truly magnificent, a sight impossible from Earth. Even a clear night sky was something you wouldn't see unless far from human activities, but beauty and danger more often than not come hand in hand. This held true even more in this alien world. So being active during the night was his sight, even if marginally better than a human in all aspects, was still limited, and this is without considering the frequent swarm of stingbats. Thought stingbats as dangerous as they were, forget about you almost instantly if they lost sight of you. It was almost comical. Up in his tree house, Liam was whistling the aberration theme while working on a collar, a little thing he decided to craft where he would put trinkets related to events and important things to him. Tokens, and memories. The egg was in a big satchel made of cords filled with warm moss. It was attached right to his side in a way his body's heat will radiate on the egg. A very crude way of incubating an egg, one he wasn't even sure if what he was doing was working. Either way, it was the only way he had at the moment. The time it will take to build an incubator and aliment it with electricity will be superior to the time the egg can stay in stasis by at least a factor of 5. 9. First contact with the natives. Blah blah blah, that indicates it's spoken in Na-6. I hope it doesn't bother people that the dialogue with Na-6 in their tongue isn't written in Na-6, but it's severely lacking in words compared to English. I don't know it, and all the translators I found are trash. Have a very pleasant day. It has been nearly a month since Liam killed the great ostropede. He counted the days, he was at 56 days and it would go beyond that. Keeping count kept him grounded in reality. His current memory stopping from forgetting to miscount. And that's why there was no random object painted with his blood on it and with a name such as Wilson, then followed by him talking to it as an actual person. He was extremely lonely, he missed his home, his family, and his friends. That much he knew, but he was not insane, not miserable enough to go down to that level. He didn't wallow in self-pity at his situation, and neither was he looking to blame any higher being for responsible for it. Or some cosmical event that he was unlucky enough to be caught in. Either way, it was out of his control. And worrying about aspects of life you cannot control in any way, shape or form is a rabbit hole that led to many unpleasant things. A type of thing he preferred to avoid at the moment. The sky was clear of any clouds, the warm rays of 2 of the 3 suns bathing the great plain, and walking along a path of dirt in the tall alien grass were Liam, who was coming back from a rather successful hunt. He was proud of himself to have finally managed to cleanly kill one of those strange paranoid deer antelope-like animals, otherwise known by humans as hexapede, shy and wary creatures that ran away from anything and everything at any signs, even the wind. Very elegant too, and delicious. Hunting for his own sustenance was something he found he loved to do, not the act of killing the animal, but the thrill of hunting, joy at a successful hunt. And there was something else, something unique compared to buying food at a supermarket or killing at the family farm. And it tasted better. Opening the 13 feet 1 meter giant door made of clay, wood, thatch, and stones, one similar in many ways to an adobe dinosaur gateway, with a grunt he closed it right after. The dry ground below showed trails of dirt and a lack of vegetation due to it being open and closed regularly. One door that no regular Na-6 and even less normal human could open by themselves. All around the giant tree where his nest-like house was were hundreds of tree trunks with clay in between one another, and stone served as a tall wall encompassing his entire base, protecting against most creatures. There also were hidden trapdoors connected to the outside in case of urgency, where accessing the main door wasn't an option, or in case of stingbat swarm or even possibly stampedes from various animals. It was his approximately safe-ish haven. The death of the great ostropede was soon followed by an explosion in wildlife, not surprising considering the aggressiveness and overpowering territorial instincts of the murder bird. One thing he was worried about was if another of such animals were to come, but for the moment this worry seemed unfounded. He was still mentally and physically prepared to face another one. Because life never misses a chance to fuck you sideways with a cactus, that is what he learned even more when you act rashly without thinking things through, so better be ready when it happens than not. Taking out the dead hexapede from his inventory, he placed it on a stone slab with residues of dry blood, the body void of any injury but its head where a hole that let Liam see from the back of its head to where once was one of its 4 eyes. One clean throw with a bronze javelin to the head from 190 meters, 295 feet, was all it took. The critter didn't see it coming, or did it understand it was dead before its brain was already skewered. A knife materialized in his left hand and he started to properly prepare the carcass, all the while he was whistling something that didn't have any particular meaning. His whistling was answered to by a happy chirp from a hole carved in the trunk of his tree that was covered by many layers of ropes and leaves. Queep. Yes, I'm back, he stopped whistling and said, with a slight smile on his face. Another happy chirp followed in response. It was the egg, or more precisely the chick, that was developing within its confine. It had only been 5 days since it started, and before that, he was starting to doubt if he messed up and killed the developing fetus by accident. Incubating chicken eggs with a machine specially built for that, and doing the same with nothing on a murderous alien version of one, not that chickens didn't have a murderous streak themselves. He was more surprised that his idea even worked so far. And since then he couldn't store the egg in his inventory, which was an excellent piece of news but also annoying as it forced him to leave the egg alone while he was out doing various things like hunting and gathering resources. About an hour and a half later, the corpse was butchered properly, organs that he deemed unfit for consumption such as what remained of the brain, and the genitals, and most of the bones were going to be burned to ash to be used as fertilizer. After that he did his usual routine, eating way more than what a human his size should be capable of, then purifying more metals from stones he picked up by using a less primitive furnace than before, but far from what he needed to really work effectively. He was also working on a blast furnace, but one thing at a time. Lien finished placing the last ingot of bronze in a storage box made for that purpose, one of the many for the various metals he got. He cracked his neck and gazed upon the sky. It was getting dark. Smelling himself, he frowned in disgust. He stunk like a rotten corpse. 7 days without taking care of one's hygiene while being active around 80% of the time with his routine do that to you apparently. Anyway, he stripped himself naked without a care in the world, storing everything on him in his inventory. Not like there was anyone to see. He was going to clean those too, and also see if anything needed repair or to be replaced while at it. Walking up to the bronze head of a shower attached to a mostly underground piping system made of bronze and bamboo-like plants connected to a reservoir for rainwater and the water table below. Using a water pump connected to the pipe system, he waited as the water was slowly and painfully drawn before the icy cold water flew in abandon on his body, drenching his messy hair, regrowing beard, then down his broad shoulder, chest, abs, and everything else. The cold barely bothered him, it was pleasant in fact. I can say whatever I want, but damn do I love my physique. I did a good job with the character creation, he thought, with plain and obvious narcissism and a hand running over his abs. Truly. It was not pleasant to acknowledge this due to various circumstances, but he preferred this body over the one he had for 24 years. It was a strange feeling, to have a new body, and become someone different yet similar. He is faster, stronger, smarter, more resilient, more agile, taller, bigger in various aspects, better looking, and in possession of extensive knowledge in various fields, some not even conceivable due to the technology gap to his Earth. There was no comparison to what he was before. Stronger physically and mentally. It was factual, and he was a man who leaned toward this over anything else, and this facet of his personality seemed to be even stronger here. The only reason he was still alive and will continue to do so was this. Besides, he would have died in not even a minute with his old body on the beach thanks to Pandora's less pleasant atmosphere for normal humans. He materialized a soap bar that was made of animal fat, hardwood ash, and a plant that smelled like lavender from his inventory and finished washing his body of grim, dirt, dust, blood, and other unspeakable that wouldn't go with only water. In the middle of the night, Liam was rudely awakened by an unknown scream attaining his ears, one of evident pain and distress that was disturbingly human-sounding. He was alerted and confused by it. He delicately put the egg away from his body, the chick inside still asleep. Good. Putting on his light bronze armor in record time, a helmet on his head with 2 holes that only let his piercing gray eyes be seen. He climbed down the tree, his gaze was on the sky, and then the great plain to look at any would swarm before it fell upon 2 tall figures. One slower than the other, getting dragged by the one at the front, and behind them were 1, 2, 3 no 5 viper wolves pursuing them. Are those Nausicaa? Shit. And they are going to get killed, he said in a voice with mixed feelings. He was not pleasantly surprised by their sudden appearance, but it was to be anticipated that at some point he was going to meet the native. The first impression was the most important. He was strong, stronger than an adult Nausicaa by a lot. But not impervious to a volley of arrows and hundreds upon hundreds of other ways that could make him depart from the realm of the living. He needed to tread on this pass with extreme care if he didn't want to become a porcupine of arrows or a slaughterer of tall blue cat people. He was beyond pissed at that. He would have preferred this to happen later when he was better equipped and actually prepared for that meeting, but when life throws lemons at you, you make lemonade or squeeze the juices back in its metaphorical eyes. Down in the Great Plain, Tuti was breathing heavily. The cool night air of Pandora was like fire to the exhausted cells of her lungs, but she continued to run to the tall tree. Stopping now would mean an inevitable death. Behind her, holding her hand with her bloody ones, was Miruk, a young male her age, 13 Earth's years, one she knew since before both could even speak. It was her fault for this situation. All because of a bet she made that he couldn't hunt a lone plain Nantang in Nausicaa or plain viper wolf for humans after the light went dark and in their territory. It didn't go well, as anyone but they would have guessed. It turned for the worst oh so rapidly, but alas for both of them, foolishness is always rewarded by great pain, be it emotional, physical, or both. Then all of a sudden her heart felt like it stopped and her pointed ears flattened. At the sight of a great wall made of trunks, her foggy mind filled with panic didn't notice it until now. Then she saw a strange and tall door. A door she knew both could never open, so alone even less so. Looking behind with horrified eyes, she saw the gravely bleeding Miruk, claw and bites mark covering most of his limbs, a miracle he was still capable of running. However, he was incapable of forming coherent thoughts, head muddled with pain and body exhausted. I will be fine. Run away. Please. Tuti, Miruk tried to speak, but it was feeble, barely a whisper, yet still audible to the Nausicaa's keen sense of hearing. He wanted her to abandon him, let him be used as a diversion while she ran and survive. No. We will survive together, Miruk. Hold on, she responded, lying to him and herself, tears trickling down her cheeks, not moving, not wanting to abandon him. Then before her horrified eyes a viper wolf, the biggest of the 5, pounced at them with ferocity. Her brain couldn't process what followed. A small but burly figure, around the size of a preteen for a Nausicaa, covered in strange shiny clothes she had never seen, with what looked like a spear, cut the head of the beast clean off. The head flew while the body fell with a heavy thump, blood spurting from the neck while the headless body twitched uncontrollably. This instantly alarmed the 4 remainings. It was the pack leader. Get the fuck away, Muts, the figure yelled, a voice deep, clearly male, adult, powerful, and booming in a language neither of the 2 Nausicaa understood, and loud enough to make them flinch in pain. It was effective as 3 of the intimidated viper wolves scampered away, their conflicting instincts screaming at them, but the side for survival was stronger and they ran into the tall grass to hopefully never cross paths again. While the 4th and youngest of the pack was momentarily stunned. A time that was used by the figure who took a knife from his belt and threw it into the young viper wolf's forehead, killing it instantly. The figure moved to the corpse, spear in hand. He calmly picked up his knife before sheathing it in its scabbard, and slowly approached the 2 teenagers. Please help him, Tuti pleaded, terrified beyond belief by the figure, stopping herself from instinctually hissing at their savior. I don't understand you. You probably don't understand me. But don't worry, I understand what you want and I would have done it either way. Liam spoke in English, voice as soft as possible, which sadly didn't work with his already deep voice and his helmet slightly altering it. 10. Playing surgeon. Tuti was scared, no, terrified of the creature in front of her. Liam perceived that easily even if she tried to hide it. Her body language, each twitch of muscles, the vein around her neck indicating an increased heartbeat, the tail, and folded ears, and even how the bioluminescent dots on her changed in intensity all were red flags. But the most evident was her eyes on him. Full of fear, fear of death, fear of him. Despair mixed with hopes and so many more. Never before has anyone looked at him this way. It was unpleasant, strange but ignorable, and she just avoided death, a traumatic event, so he could understand. But that didn't mean he liked it. He was far from being friendly looking too, his helmet vaguely shaped like a skull, cold grey eyes, his voice, and how he decapitated a viper wolf and headshot another with a knife. And compared to a Nasik's thin, ridiculously tall, and elfish frame, he was extremely muscular for them, even if his armor hid most of it. All in all, he was pretty intimidating. Even if he was smaller. Another thing he remarked was how both looked. Even if they were of another species, they looked like teenagers. They were kids, even if they were both taller than him. One boy and the other a girl, both wearing the bare minimum of clothing. Two kids with one exhausted and the other exhausted while weakening as he slowly bled out. He couldn't get a good grasp of the injuries, but he needed to act and act fast, or the young Nasiks would die. Doing simple hand gestures, he conveyed to the girl the general meaning of what he wanted her to do, and by the look of it she understood. Running up to the heavy door, he pushed it open while the girl moved the boy. Liam was aware of what he was doing, the potential danger involved in saving them, but also the potential gain of doing so, the latter per his meager knowledge about Nasik's general peaceful ways outweighing the first. It was a gamble, but one he would have had to do at some point anyway. And that without forgetting an important fact: he wasn't heartless enough to let people, be they human or Nasiks, die when he could save them. However, he was no suicidal madman such as a self-sacrificing righteous hero or a martyr for the weak, poor, and defenseless. His life came first and foremost before all. As selfish as it sounds, he was a survivor. Not like he ever thought of himself as a saint. The two Nasiks didn't magically pop up either, from their apparent young ages, even if he overestimated their strength, would always be inferior to his. It means a tribe, group, clan, or whatever they are called for Nasiks was within the reach he often moved when collecting resources and hunting. From the direction they came from, and if they moved in a roughly straight line, there should be a group of Nasiks in the general direction of the giant grotto. While the grind in his mind shifted together, he took a large cover sewed in a patchwork of stingbat's hide from a wooden box and lit a torch for him to see better. Then opened boxes, willing various objects out of his inventory, such as a stash of pink aloe vera, a saline solution in an opaque glass bottle, and more. The two unknown Nasiks didn't need to know that he could magic things in and out of existence with the glowing prism embedded in his left arm. It was common sense, a resource he was slowly but surely running out of. "Place him here," Lien said in a serious voice, nearly making Tuti, who was carrying the other Nasiks, jump out of her skin. Everything around them was unusual, but she ignored it. More important things were on her mind. Not understanding his words but still what the figure wanted, she carefully placed Miruk on the butchering slab, making the wounded teenager groan weakly. Tuti was uncertain, exhausted, afraid, confused, and many more, but at that moment her training as at Scararem kicked in. She was no stranger to the wounded and the ways to tend to them, be it healing or reducing their pain before their ultimate journey to the embrace of the All-Mother. Liam placed all of what he picked up on the stone slab and observed the Nasik's teenager's injuries. "Damn. Those are nasty claws and bite wounds, but nothing that seems immediately life-threatening," Liam analyzed with his bare-bone knowledge of Nasik's biology, but even it was evident nothing vital was touched. And he felt a weight left off his shoulder at this discovery: the kid will survive the night. He was thankful that the viper wolves tended to play with their prey, because otherwise, neither of the two would have even reached the wall of his base. Miruk was breathing heavily, delirious, unfocused eyes looking at everything but saw nothing other than vague shapes, beads of sweat all over his body, deep gash, scratch bites, and marks all over his legs, the furry tips of his tail missing, bitten of by a viper wolf. And his left hand was mangled beyond recognition, blue skin pierced by bones, and his thumbs hanging only by a thread of skin, and all of it was profusely bleeding. Liam was conscious that if it was him from before he wouldn't be this calm, at all. Now was the hard part. The current situation was way beyond his domain of expertise, even if he now was essentially a polymath. Not only that, but this was an alien, even if technically it was him the alien in the equation. The best he could hope to do was to slow or stop the bleeding, disinfect the wound as best as he could, bandage him, and maybe suture them. He could only do first aid, so it won't be pretty. Tuti didn't stay idle. She grabbed various plants Liam placed and started to grind them to paste with the mortar while singing something shamanistic similar to prayers, a string of words coming back with a name he recognized as Iwa. She was praying to her goddess. The fact she helped surprise the human, she could do whatever mystical things she wanted as long as it actually helped. He took note of what plants she took and ground, however. He learned through trial and error what plants could be used, but for him a poisonous plant that will cause someone else to puke their organs, but for him, it will cause a negligible stomach ache for the day. And that was without taking into consideration that a plant could be harmless to humans but deadly to Nausicaa and vice versa. Here she used the pink aloe vera and 2 other plants, and he was certain it was to reduce the pain and put the teenager to sleep from what he knew about those plants. So it was better if she did this, as she should be more knowledgeable on what are the medicinal plants of the Great Plains and how to take care of the wound of her kind. She was very young, but age can be misleading, and the time was not to doubt. She fed Miruk the paste of medicinal herb by delicately lifting his head while still muttering prayers. The effects were immediate as his breathing became better and his expression became peaceful and serene if a bit strained. Liam focused on the mangled hand. The thumb was as good as gone and most of the hand too. He put a rope and a stick right above the wrist, a makeshift tourniquet. Tuti, even if afraid of the figure, was going to stop what he was doing, as it was not how her mother thought her until she saw how the bleeding of her friend's mangled hand virtually stopped as Liam tightened the rope. Never had she seen such a strange method used before. She decided to trust him. If she fought him for what he was doing, he would have knocked her out anyway. To put it simply, their way to heal was based on various concoctions either of plants or animals' organs, sometimes a mix of both. Then there was the use of incense, various rituals to get rid of evil spirits aka disease or parasites, sacrifice, songs, and more. Sadly, the results of such methods were varying, with most ending up on the negative spectrum. Life even for the native on this enchantingly beautiful moon was harsh and unforgiving. The next day, late in the Pandorian morning, Liam was awake. He wasn't fatigued one bit as he was awakened after having slept enough time. He needed less sleep than a regular human. He stayed all night surveying the Nausicaa, mostly out of a healthy dose of paranoia, while preparing himself and thinking of plans for what was going to follow. He was not happy that this was forced upon him. He also learned the name of his 2 temporary guests. The girl had said the name of the boy while she prayed, and the boy while in his during the operation and after in his sleep. Speaking of, the girl stayed awake until sheer exhaustion caught her, and she fell unconscious in the middle of another prayer. Quite an impressive show of will in his opinion. She was strong. Hearing a groan of pain, Liam lifted his head. Putting the knife he was cleaning back on its sheath, his gaze fell upon a very confused and rapidly waking Miruk. This confusion was rapidly cleared as fragmented memories of what happened slammed into his mind. Liam's slightly bored and amused gray eyes met the yellow ones of the rapidly panicking teens who were gradually coming back to their senses. The air became tense. Lucky him, what made his friend was still in effect. He was only getting a percentage of the pain. Miruk was covered in bandages, most imbibed with red blood even if recently changed. The wounds were in grand parties disinfected by Liam's saline solution, and half of them were sutured. With the mangled hand, Liam did what he could try and salvage as much as possible, but without training in the field of medicine besides first aid, adding to the lack of modern equipment, convenience, and medicines. He was forced to amputate the thumbs, and half of the end digit of the pinky finger with tutia cord first, ANS, without considering the potential damaged tendon, nerves, and muscles of the hand. He couldn't do anything to help. He tried to lessen the damages as much as he could. But at least there was no more bleeding, and low risk of infections if taken care of properly, and the hand wasn't entirely amputated. This lack of fingers was a problem he could solve down the line by making prosthetics for Miruk if given the opportunity in the future. He had plenty of knowledge on how to do that from the various engrams, be they from the game or not. This means he could easily design such things as high-tech hand/fingers prosthetics. But without access to anything advanced, it will always be worse than biological. And Liam already had done more than enough. Before Miruk tried to do something immensely stupid, another groan, softer and more feminine, was heard, and his gaze moved to his chest, where he was met with an awakening to tea. His expression and realization as to who was sleeping on his chest were hilarious to Liam, who stopped a laugh from escaping him. They were no really different from humans in that aspect. Standing up, Tuti smiled but looked over sadly at Miruk, and she hugged him with tears in her eyes. As the two cried their hearts out, Liam smiled while he felt a pang of hunger and decided to cook. Standing up without attracting any attention, he came back with a ceramic cooking pot, 3 plates, 3 wood forks, a kilo of marinated papyrus lard, something akin to potatoes, various herbs, and water. Never has Liam's attention strayed far from the teens for more than 3 seconds. He knew they aren't dangerous, but he didn't know them, or how Nasics this age really behaved, or Nasics behavior in general for that matter. Miruk and Tuti both never saw any humans at all. They know of the general physical characteristics, the 5's finger, lack of a tail, no neural queue, and a skin color completely alien to them. And also a greater pelosity. The human has strange haircuts on his chin, cheeks, around the mouth, and on his chest, arms, legs, above the eyes, and more. It was quite puzzling to them. Another thing was, shouldn't sky people need to have a strange device on their faces? Maybe their savior is a different breed of sky people, or maybe it was false AMD, they didn't need that, who knows. But their savior had a strange prims-like object glowing in his arm. It looked more like an integral part of his body. Sky people also have that apparently. Stories of sky people or demons were shared through stories from other tribes at the yearly meeting of the migratory clans of the Great Plains, or when trading resources with other clans. Depending on the storyteller, the stories were often more than not grim and unbelievable for most of the Nasics, flying metal birds capable of raining fire down and destruction on Iowa, insanity. Unknown to them, they were lucky the RDA didn't see or found anything of significance in those wild and dangerous plains. But one thing was certain for the horse clans of the plain: humans existed and you needed to be wary of them. But the Nasics held the belief to only judge one's own action. Of course, that was only theory and mostly for other Nasics. The two teenagers were incredibly curious about these sky people. And everything around them only fueled their curiosity. There was much strange contraption, but none was remotely similar to the horror the stories told. It was relieving. I'm infinitely grateful. You have saved me, no, us. You saved us. I cannot express how thankful I am to you, Sky Person, our savior, savior of our foolishness. I will forever be in your favor, I swear this on the All-Mother. Miruk spoke, voice hesitant, ears showing mixed emotions, mostly shame and sadness at his state and the implication, but his gaze never faltered.